today. So welcome everyone. I am happy to see so many familiar names. And I am going to spend a little time this morning giving an update on our results from the latest wave of data collection that we've done for the Marshall Fire Unified Research Survey. Give me a sec to get this shared. All right, go right to the key takeaways. Okay, so here's what I'd like to do today is to spend a little time, just a brief reminder of the project overview. I think most of you have been engaged and have some background in our survey effort, but I'll give just a brief kind of refresh on who we are and where these numbers are coming from. And then I'm going to get in, we have a lot of data to share. And also there are a lot of things that we have in the survey that we don't have time to share today. And so one of the things that I really want to encourage folks to do is to just put questions in the chat. Things that you have, questions that are coming up. What we really want to do is to continue, as you'll see at the very end. We are planning to continue this work, and we've got some time and energy and resources to continue looking at the data we've collected, to continue collecting new data. So it's really helpful for us, and actually the presentation we're giving today, we've focused some of our results on things that many of you noted as areas of interest, questions that you suggested we add to the latest round of the survey. So we really want this to be iterative and interactive. It helps us to know what you all are interested in knowing. And that can guide, what we spend our time looking at and reporting back to you on. So please use the chat to put any questions in. I will leave some time, hopefully for some Q&A at the end as well. So I can address some of those, but also, like I said, that'll give us some fodder for future work. So quick introduction. Again, I think I know most of you, but I'm Katie Dickinson. I'm an associate professor at the Colorado School of Public Health. And this is a large collaborative research survey effort. I've got a list here of our many collaborators and contributors to specifically this Wave 3 technical report, which is where I'm going to draw a lot of the results that I am sharing today from. And actually, Hannah, I'll have you introduce yourself in a sec, but also I was going to see, maybe if you can just put the link to the technical report in the chat as well. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Hannah Walters. I'm a DRPH candidate at the Colorado School of Public Health and one of Katie's students. And yeah, I think I began working on some of this work at the end of the Wave 2 survey and have been working a lot on this current survey. So yeah, great to be with you all this morning.
And Hannah will be continuing to work on this project along with several of the folks here. Will be our project manager. So you will continue to see, emails and correspondence from her. Definitely want to acknowledge my great collaborators, Betsy Albright, Desiree Crow, and Andy Rumbaugh in particular, have been sort of along for the full ride on all of this. And then, as we said, we've really been pulling in, and you may see some of your own names here, acknowledging that, this effort to put these surveys together and gather information has been a team effort. We've engaged a lot of academics across the country and locally, as well as, again, many of you here representing local governments and community organizations, because the goal of this survey really from the beginning has been to learn as much as possible. We know, as a member of the community, I know that this was a devastating event for people who lived through it. And we really think it's important to learn what we can from that event, from our experiences, to continue to help what, the efforts that are ongoing, as we will see here, right? We all know that even 2 years post-fire, the recovery that we are undergoing is not done. And so, learning what we can about who is recovering successfully and who's not, as well as, using those lessons to help us here, as well as sharing those lessons with other communities experiencing similar disasters. We think that's really important for this type of work and some of the things that we as researchers can contribute to this recovery process. So the survey covers a wide variety of different topics. And as I said, I'm not going to go into all of these today, but just flashing them up there again. And one of the things that we have started doing, right, is making some of the connections between these different topics. So looking at, for example, how mental health outcomes are related to rebuilding and experiences with even, some of the initial experiences that people had with evacuation, for example. So those are things that we can do and connections that we can make. What I'm going to present today is sort of some little snapshots, kind of continuing to do that, little broad brushstrokes. And that is why I really, again, encourage you to be sort of those curious questions about, the things that would really help you, or the things that you would want to know about in terms of how these things are connected, or, various different topics. Again, put those in the chat or send us emails afterwards, and we can follow up on that. Here's our timeline. So obviously we all know the Marshall Fire occurred at the tail end of 2021. We conducted our first wave of surveys in between May and July of 2022, so about 6 months post-fire. And for that first wave of surveys, we recruited all of the households that were within the fire perimeter, in addition to random samples of homes in the 3 affected jurisdictions, so Superior, Louisville, and unincorporated Boulder County. So random samples of folks in sort of increasing distances from the fire. We wanted to get a view both of the experiences of people who were most, directly and severely impacted, but also, the experiences of the broader community and folks that maybe experienced some damage to their home, or maybe didn't have any damage to their home, but are still members of this community and are kind of part of that recovery story. So that was our first wave. In the second wave, we resampled all of the folks that responded to that wave 1 survey. And then we also were able to add in collaboration and with the partnership with Boulder County, a new set of recruits from the county's official list of all disaster affected respondents. And so we kind of got this bump in responses in wave 2, which was great. That survey period spanned the 1-year anniversary of the fire. And then in what will again focus the results that I'm going to show today are focused on our wave 3 survey, which was conducted shortly after the 2-year anniversary of the fire. We invited anyone who had taken one of our prior 2 surveys to take that wave 3 survey. And so again, what I'm going to focus on today is really sort of some of the wave 3 results and numbers, but I will be some of the things that we can do because we have this broad survey, this continuous survey, is to look at how things have changed over time. So, again, how people's experiences in their early waves affect what they're talking about, what they're experiencing. Hold on just a second. Thanks. My dad is visiting and decided that this would be a good moment to start a construction project. So there's a little banging in the background here. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our sample and the characteristics of the sample that we have recruited. There's, again, a lot of numbers here. I will also share these slides afterwards, so don't feel like you have to digest everything in this exact moment, but the things that I wanted to highlight for you all right now is mainly just that we again have data for these respondents over time. In wave 3, some of the key things are that we continue to have good representation of respondents across the 3 affected jurisdictions. We also do have attrition, meaning that people who responded to earlier surveys haven't responded to this survey, and we see some differences. So some of the folks that for example, we see some somewhat higher attrition in the unincorporated Boulder County group. We also see that we continue to have good representation of folks across different levels of impact from the Marshall Fire. So, for example, our Wave 3 survey includes 286 respondents who suffered a complete loss. I think you all remember that the total number of complete loss households is just over 1,000. So we have a little bit, more than a quarter of the complete loss respondents here in Wave 3, which is great. And actually, if you look at, in Wave 2, we actually had 461. So in total, over these surveys, the sample that we've been able to collect has captured a significant portion. Of course, survey research is difficult, and getting folks, particularly folks who have been affected by a disaster, to take additional time to respond to surveys is hard. And so I think it's also important to understand that, the picture that we're painting here is not a universal picture, right? We think we've captured some very relevant experiences and a significant set of folks that have lived through this, but we don't pretend that we're speaking for absolutely everyone. Just another glimpse into the characteristics of this wave 3 sample. So we've got somewhat more people who are identifying as female than male in the sample. We have, folks across a range of ages, slightly, lower percentage of folks in the youngest age categories, but then, folks in sort of the middle and upper age groups here. Not surprisingly, given the characteristics of this area, our sample is majority white, but we do have folks who are identifying as people of color, and then a range of income, and then you'll see the sample sizes vary because they're people who choose not to answer these demographic questions as well. Okay, so I'm going to dive in and talk a little bit about progress in rebuilding, right? That's sort of one of the big top line questions that I'm sure many of us have is, how are people doing, people who lost homes in that rebuilding process. And so here's our sort of overall picture by jurisdiction, again, for the folks who are participating in this Wave 3 survey. So of the folks that lost homes, we actually have so the stages definitions are given here. So stage 4 is people who have who have moved home, or the majority of those have actually moved home. A small number have reported that they had a certificate of occupancy, but hadn't yet moved home at the time of the survey. And just a reminder too, so the survey was conducted between February and April, so these data are a few months old, but give a good sense of where folks were a few months ago. So we have a significant progress with some variation across jurisdictions. So the proportion of folks who have moved back home in this sample is highest in Superior and lowest in Boulder County. And also, what we, again, not making too much of, saying absolutely, 61% of all people have moved home, right? This is of these residents. But I think what we really want to capture, right, is that there is variation. And so that is, again, something that we're able to do with these data, is to look at, what might be some of the factors that determine who has moved home, who hasn't. and particularly who's maybe in those, stage 1, stage 2, really haven't gotten off the ground yet. So some of the things that we've looked at, and we also looked at this in wave 2, so a year after the fire, we found at that 2 year at that 1 year post fire mark, we found that both income and insurance coverage were kind of significantly related to the patterns of rebuilding that we see. The income signal here is actually not as clear. We see kind of somewhat consistent patterns across income groups. Interestingly, the number of folks who sold homes, the proportion of folks who have sold their homes is actually smallest in that sort of middle upper income group, and is similar in the highest and the lower income groups. So we thought that was interesting. What we do see is that insurance coverage continues to be kind of more related. And so folks who are reporting that their insurance is covering, right, so are less underinsured, are closer to having full insurance coverage for rebuilding. Those folks are significantly more likely to be in that, later, to have moved home or be further along in that rebuilding process. We also have started to look at some other factors like age, and actually, Hannah, if you are interested in kind of chiming in on this piece, I know this is something that you were focusing on as well.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So, yeah, looking at this rebuilding by age, what we saw is in our, I guess I'll focus on those who sold their home and did not opt to rebuild, or perhaps rebuilt and then sold. Um, we see the greatest amount of sales being reported amongst our oldest respondents who are 65 and older at about 18%. And then in the younger groups, that's less, with only 3% in that 45 to 54 year old age group. And then we also have more people in that sort of lower half of age groups, the basically 45 and under. More of those folks are reporting that they have a certificate of occupancy or are back home. So um, some of these results might suggest that folks who are older, perhaps even 65 and older, are less frequently reporting that they've returned home than the younger folks. Although it is interesting to note in this youngest age group of under 45, that is also where we see perhaps more people who are stuck in stage 1. So sort of this like dichotomy going on there. Um, yeah. Anything else to add there, Katie, I might have missed?
Yeah, no, I think that covers it well. So again, I think, one of the things that we're really curious about is this variation and some of the why behind this. And so again, most of what I'm going to present today is sort of our numbers, our quantitative data. But we also do have team members that are doing interviews and talking with folks and digging into some of these stories. And I think that sort of what we call mixed methods, right? Combining sort of this quantitative numbers and then some of the interviews and storytelling, I think is really important for unpacking something like this, because what we see is that there isn't one story, right? I think that's kind of one of the big takeaways here. There's a range of different experiences that people are having, even within an age group. So I think that under 45, thing that Hannah was just highlighting is fascinating. We have more of those folks, the largest proportion of folks that have moved home and the largest proportion of folks that haven't started rebuilding. So continuing to talk a little bit about insurance, since we know that has been a huge factor in the experiences of people dealing with home damage and complete loss. So this is one additional sort of insurance picture that we know folks were interested in as the 2-year anniversary came and went. We see that most people who were still displaced did not have ALE coverage, either never had it or it had run out by that 2-year mark. I think the fact that 40% of these respondents said that they did still have ALE coverage is somewhat interesting as well. I think that's potentially good news and likely a result of advocacy that had been happening to continue supporting folks, because we know this, again, ensure the road to recovery is long. Another thing that's kind of interesting overall is, whether what impacts people are seeing across these different damage categories to their insurance premiums. And I think what's interesting here, first of all, across all three of these groups, so folks that did not experience damage, a majority of them, 68%, reported that their insurance premiums had increased, right? So this is an impact that's community-wide across this area. The proportion is largest for the folks that experienced some damage, and actually smallest for those who experienced a complete loss, interestingly. So yeah, so I think, again, the sort of looking at the overall impacts on the community and how that varies. We know that, again, the sort of story and the support from insurance is a huge piece of, how people are able to recover here. It is interesting to me that, most respondents across, well, folks who had no damage, haven't been dealing as much with their insurance providers. So a larger proportion of those, are kind of in that neutral category. For folks that experience either damage or a complete loss, the majority actually say that they are somewhat or extremely satisfied. However, right, this is again we don't want to pay attention only to majorities, and so there are significant numbers of people in the damage and complete loss category who have not had positive experiences. Among those with damage, 11% of our respondents say that they had actually filed a formal complaint with the Division of Insurance, and that's actually up to 27% in the complete loss group. So again, an indicator that there are some significant challenges that folks have faced, and the path and the process of dealing with insurance has been challenging and difficult for many people. I'm going to move on to talking about energy codes and funding sources. So how have the people who are, those who are rebuilding, what choices have they made in terms of the codes that they are building to, and what funding sources have they accessed? So this is, again, data from Wave 3. So for folks that are in the process of rebuilding, among, again, complete loss homeowners, in both, so as I'm sure many of you know, Boulder County had a slightly different story with an energy code that had been in place for a longer period of time. The Build Smart Code, I think is what it's called. And so there was sort of less decision making for the UBC folks, whereas in Superior and Louisville, this switch or this upgrade from the 2018 IECC to the 2021 had either happened right before the Marshall Fire in the Louisville case, or was adopted soon after the Marshall Fire. In both jurisdictions, the decision was to allow residents to allow complete loss folks to rebuild to 2018, but they could opt to build to 2021 if they wanted to. And so with that context, the majority, again, of folks in this sample who were in the rebuilding process had adopted the 2021 IECC. Some of those portion in both jurisdictions, even going to the full net zero. The proportion is somewhat higher in Louisville than in Superior, but yeah, kind of seeing a significant number who did manage to opt into that higher energy code. Again, we do, look at this by both income and insurance coverage, and we do see some variation there. The patterns are somewhat interesting. So, for example, if we're looking at this lower graph, the folks who are in that highest income bracket are actually have the largest proportion who decided to stick just with the 2018 codes. And also the highest proportion who went full net zero. So again, some differential stories going on here. In that lowest income group, which granted has a smaller sample size, again, we still have 75% of those folks have adopted 2021 with or without the net zero. Some variation by insurance as well. So looking like, those with lower, the more underinsured group, also less likely to have adopted the more energy efficient code. Was there anything else that you wanted to add about this, Hannah, or was that?
No, I think that about covers it. Yeah.
Thanks. We also looked at and asked a number of questions about what funding sources people are using for rebuilding. So obviously, insurance is a big one. But this breaks that down. The things that people have tapped into, from retirement accounts, funding from nonprofit or charity, help from friends and family, GoFundMe donations, and construction loans. And just looking at those who any differences we're seeing here. So for example, the folks who adopted the net zero code were the most likely to say that they had they were sort of tapping into additional funding sources overall. So most likely to say that they'd used retirement accounts, that they'd access nonprofit, GoFundMe donations. Some of you may have followed some work by some researchers at CU Boulder that found that GoFundMe donations actually disproportionately benefited those with higher incomes and more resources, which isn't very surprising. GoFundMe kind of works through our social networks, and so yeah, I think what we see overall is that the folks that were able to opt into those more stringent building codes had potentially more sources of funding and support that they could tap into. We will be giving, we can get into these a little bit more if folks have additional questions. I think this was something that we were anticipated some interest in this group, and looking at and really looking at this relationship again between both rebuilding success and maybe some of those energy code choices by the different programs that people were able to access. This is for the folks that were rebuilding complete loss homeowners who hadn't sold yet. About 260 folks are in this group. So out of those, the number that applied for each of these different funding sources, and then of those who applied, how many said they received them. I think I'm guessing that many of you heard some similar things to what we were hearing, with some difficulties and challenges with the SBA loans. And so that is actually the one where we see the lowest percentage of folks who reported that they'd applied for those loans actually receiving them. Whereas the Community Foundation, most of the folks who had applied for that had received those that grant, and also energy rebates from Xcel in the state of Colorado. Folks had pretty good success at tapping into those. Anything else you want to add about this, Hannah?
Yeah, I think one thing that's sort of interesting in this table is that the state of Colorado Housing Recovery Program had the lowest number of folks saying that they actually applied for it. So I think that's one thing to highlight and maybe dive into a little bit more about whether that was just awareness of that program or perhaps certain eligibility requirements.
Thanks.
Katie, do you want to hold questions till the end, or can I read one from the chat now? What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, let's take a little breather. Let me breathe for a sec.
Sure. So Lisa Ritchie was curious about the numbers on the local use tax, the final one there, and basically whether we had recommendations on increasing that percentage. I'm thinking percentage of acceptance. Um, yeah, because that's what
Yeah,
affects.
that's a great question. So I think, you know, those are things that we can look at. We do have some open response questions where we ask people about their experiences, and we can look at those. Potentially things to look at and follow up interviews. But again, I think, you know, a lot of this is sort of for you know, also getting ideas from all of you on sort of how these are being communicated, and you know, just kind of providing some information that maybe there is somewhat less either awareness, or you know, why is it that folks are less likely to be receiving those if they've applied for them. And I think yeah, that's a good point, Allison, is that maybe they had just applied for them, right? Maybe there was you know, sort of a surge in applications, and so looking at, you know, how many, you know, I think maybe that's a question, is like, you know, how many outstanding applications do you have, or you know, following up with your internal teams to see, like, you know, are we rejecting these applications, right? Or is it just that we've just got a backlog that we haven't gotten to?
Actually, Katie, I wonder too if because we do also ask recipients which ones they were aware of, and I wonder if any learned about one of these from the survey and then proceeded to look it up and apply. So that would be sort
Yeah,
of interesting.
interesting. Okay, thanks. Yeah, keep the questions coming in the chat. So yeah, I've been giving you a lot of numbers. I want to give you some words now. So these were actually some of my favorite questions to look through. We asked the folks who have moved back home, what's the best part about being back in your home? And this is, you know, a number of words that I'll, you know, kind of let you digest for a second. The word home, I think appeared, you know, in most of these responses, just the sense of being home, having stability, the not driving so much, right? The being more connected. Neighbors was another, you know, really important one. And then, but you know, again, like, you know, these experiences aren't universal. So this one, you know, saying, and I don't know yet, it's just weird, right? And so I think, you know, that was another thing in conversations that I've had, and maybe some of you as well. You know, there is a sense of like, you're on this treadmill and you're just running and running, and then suddenly like that's over, and there's a little bit of a letdown, right? And so it's a mixed bag, but I think, you know, the sense of relief, stability, you know, having accomplished at least this phase, and it doesn't mean that recovery is done just because folks have moved home, but obviously that's a significant milestone. We also then asked, you know, what do people miss about their pre-fire homes and neighborhoods? I would say one of the most common responses had to do with trees and vegetation, and right, just having the mature landscaping. I visited folks who lived a couple doors down from us while they were rebuilding their home, and they had just moved back home, and their backyard was a, you know, mud pit, and their dog was tracking mud in the house, and so just, you know, that the sense of being home, but not quite, you know, having everything settled quite back. It's a construction zone. And then some of this, you know, gets, you know, really philosophical, that, you know, I miss being ignorant about the risk of grassland fire. And I think that's something that we hear a lot too, that this is now very present in people's minds. And then of course, belongings and the things that people lost. So yeah, I mean, again, I think we're, seeing this sort of complicated, complex picture. So, those are some stories from folks who have moved home. We also, want to pay attention to the folks who are still displaced, and the Standing Homes group, again, is a group that I think we've all come to understand is, how it faces their own unique challenges. It's a relatively small group. In this sample, and I think it just may be the folks that responded to this specific question. So we only have 16 respondents who were displaced at wave 1, who had damaged their homes, but their homes were still standing at wave 1. Many of those have moved back home now, some of them haven't. So the folks who hadn't returned home, just asking them, why haven't you returned home yet? Folks still dealing with remediation, a significant number of folks that are dealing with insurance, right, disputes with their insurance, and then these concerns about is it safe for me to be home? We noted that, yeah, we do have folks that have sold, and also, asked people at this wave if they are considering selling their homes. So, most people, and, again, looking at this, including the folks who have no damage, right? Because there are folks who move away just for other reasons unrelated to the fire, or maybe reasons related to the fire, but not related to specific damage to their home, right? So here are some responses, or the breakdown for our different survey respondents in terms of, who's considering selling, and again, I think kind of that Standing Homes group, so the folks with damage who weren't living there, and again, this I think includes everyone who wasn't living there at the first wave of the survey, so some of them actually had moved home at this wave. But these folks are the most likely to either have already sold, 13%, or to be considering, or to, kind of say, I'm not even sure at this point. This is a long list, but for people who are either considering or who had sold their homes, what are some of the factors that they, are like, how important are each of these factors to that decision about whether to stay or go? And so, again, these are folks that either are considering or who have already sold, and how important they're ranking these different factors. So the time and cost of rebuilding, and these are among folks that that had either some damage or complete loss. So that just, time and cost of rebuilding, some folks, mentioning, building codes and restrictions, complexity of the building process, and all of the different things. And this is something, again, if, I'm kind of putting a few different pieces together, some of our other team members who have done some interviews, I think some of this may also be a factor of age and kind of social support. It is a lot, it's a full-time job, many people have said, to really navigate this process. And so, if folks, yeah, for whatever reason, don't have the bandwidth to do all that navigation, I think that that's a significant factor. And then also just noting that, the trauma related to the fire, concerns about future fires, right? Some of those factors are important here too. So again, it's complex. It's, different things for different people, but there's a number of different factors coming into play here. We've also looked at where folks are. So this again is a little bit complicated, and I will share slides so all of you can spend the hours and hours that I'm sure you will poring over these and digesting them. But what we're showing here is for folks who lived in our 3 different jurisdictions before the fire, how many, so the black boxes here are how many are, so for folks that are still not home, where are they at the time of this survey? So folks who were in Boulder County, that, you know, are more likely than in the other jurisdictions. It's a larger jurisdiction overall, to have stayed within that jurisdiction. And then, you know, where are folks gone? And so, you know, for example, you know, one thing that's interesting to note is that folks in Superior are actually the most likely, there's a higher proportion of them who have moved entirely out of state, for example. We also look at this by housing tenure, so renters and owners. And one of the things that's clear to us here is that the folks that were renting in Boulder County, right, in our 3 jurisdictions before the fire, are significantly more likely than the folks who were homeowners to have been, you know, 2 years after the fire, living outside of Boulder County. So renters have been displaced further away, whereas more of the owners have managed to stay closer by. All right, running through, I think this is my last little block here. That's a good question, the N on these displacement slides. So, Hannah, would you, I think these are actually, I don't know if those are percentages or ends, but yeah, we'll get an answer to that question for you, Dave. Thanks. Okay, so you know, the other thing that our team is really interested in is sort of the policy processes, the decisions that local governments and state governments are making, and sort of who's engaged in those processes. So this is again from the Wave 3 data, so 2 years post-fire. What we're seeing is that you know, the number of people who report that they have participated in a policy process, I believe this is related to the fire specifically, in the past 3 months, is you know, about a quarter, a little over a quarter in all 3 jurisdictions, slightly higher in Louisville. Again, just a little flag here that, you know, we see higher participation among homeowners than renters, for example. Various different dimensions we can look at. These are some questions that we've asked at every survey wave, and we find that so we asked people whether they agreed or disagreed with questions like the energy efficiency standards that were in place at the time of the fire were too restrictive. We see folks in Louisville most likely to agree with that statement, more likely to agree with that statement than folks in Boulder County, in UBC, for example. Also asking folks about their support for changing land use policies to prevent future wildfire impacts. Strong support for that across all of the jurisdictions. In Wave 3, in response to some requests that we got from folks giving input on this survey, we included a question about whether a long-term recovery center should be set up sort of a bit more permanently, knowing that the Marshall Rock was having to close shortly after the survey was implemented. So you know, there are a significant number of people who did express a desire for a long-term recovery center. You know, several folks that didn't really have a strong opinion. But again, this damage not living there group was the most likely to be in support of that. I think, again, reflecting sort of the ongoing needs and sense that that navigation is you know, still potentially more complicated than for other folks, and a continuing need for support. And then, you know, we asked about whether, you know, various questions about both social support and whether folks feel supported by their local elected officials. In the 3 jurisdictions, the majority did feel that their local elected officials will help them when they're in trouble, but and at the same time, right, again, this sort of story, there is variation both across jurisdictions, and you know, in all 3 places there are folks that are that feel less supported. And so again, I think looking at some of those factors and unpacking who some of those folks may be, how much that's related to their experiences, and potential unmet needs, is something that we can continue to dive into. All right, so some key takeaways. I first and foremost, I think it just is really important. As I said at the beginning, survey research is hard. I've done many surveys. This is one of the most complicated surveys that I've done, and I think particularly, right, asking people who have gone through a traumatic event to take the time to fill out a survey and to do that, 3 times over 2 years. It's a big ask, and at the same time, we hope, and we've heard from we had questions in the survey, sort of asking if people felt like this was a useful exercise, and many people, expressed gratitude at being able to share their story. And we hope that is our intention, is that this is a process that's positive and helps us all learn and again support kind of recovery at these various different levels. So we are deeply grateful for the time that members of our communities have spent participating in these processes. I think it's really important to celebrate the successes that our communities have made. I think by many metrics, we are sort of ahead of pace for national disasters of this scale in terms of getting folks back home. And that's great. And that is a tribute to our communities and our local governments that have, I know, worked very hard. I've seen that firsthand, trying to navigate this and take care of our residents. At the same time, recognizing that those successes aren't the universal story, that there are still individuals and groups who continue to struggle and face specific challenges. Understanding, what's happening and what are the barriers that folks who are, have lost homes and the standing home residents who still need support and need us to understand that the recovery isn't done. So trying to reach and understand the needs of these groups. We also think renters are a very important group. Our team continues to be very focused on sort of the equity related questions here and identifying how this disaster is changing the face of our communities, and the fact that we have renters who are more likely to, who have left our community, and taking a look at what it's going to take to create opportunities to bring to have economically, among other dimensions, and economically diverse communities, et cetera. So yeah, we look forward to continuing to foster these partnerships. And to that end, we have received funding from the Joint Fire Science Program. And this is just sort of a snapshot of our, I gave you a timeline of our 3 surveys so far. This is now kind of going out into the future. So starting in the next month or so, we'll be launching this next phase with the Joint Fire Science Program funding, and have plans to continue collecting information through surveys, interviews, potential interviews with local decision makers as well. And we'll also be able to bring on an equity advisory board with stipends for folks, members of our community, kind of representing diverse voices and experiences, to work hand in hand with us, both collecting information, understanding, kind of figuring out how to interpret what we're seeing, and presenting that out. So stay tuned for that. We will have more requests and information coming up for that. We also are planning a community event to share some of these same results and really focus on inviting folks who have taken our surveys, as well as other community members. So we're in the planning process for that, likely, I think in October is what we were looking at dates, and thanks to Allison and Taylor and Superior for helping us with that. So I'm gonna stop well, maybe I'll keep my screen up. Go ahead, Lisa.
I just wanted to say how grateful I am that you all have done this survey. I have to be honest. I think the first round I was a little, not really thinking that I think the long-term longevity and the results of this survey would be valuable, but I think seeing this third wave and just looking for the trends and tailoring, responses and ways that we're, where things are falling through, like, half of the folks are only taking use tax. I want to thank you very much. This presentation was great. I really appreciate your work and, just determination to kind of continue through this. So just thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Are there questions, comments, curiosities?
So Katie, definitely want to reiterate the thank you for pulling this together and for helping us better understand what's happening in the communities out there. I'm curious on some of the rebuilding assistance programs. I think you all mentioned that you have information about how many people were aware of certain assistance programs. I think that would be really interesting information for us to be able to see and better understand as well, to maybe learn some lessons about how those different programs were communicated, and if there's anything we can learn for the future there.
Great, yeah. So yeah, Hannah will make some notes and we can do some follow-up on, again, any things that you're curious about. So yeah, that specifically, we can share that information.
Great. The other thing that, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. No worries.
So the other thing that, occurs to me is kind of, I think one can pick it out through all of the slides, but would be really interesting if there is some way to put together a mini profile, perhaps, of what you guys can glean about who is having challenges getting through even that phase 1 and phase 2 in the rebuild process, to better understand for those individuals who really are struggling to, make significant strides in what's obviously a very challenging process. Is there anything we can really learn by looking at all of these different data points together to better understand who those individuals are and what some of those needs and challenges are that they're facing?
I think that's a great point. And I think, again, a really good opportunity for us to take advantage of both the numbers and some of the open-ended responses that people are giving, because it's challenging when those groups do become small. We don't want to say, oh, well, there's just a few of them, so we're not worried about it, right? Like, we know that even if this is a small, statistically kind of small group within the sample, those experiences are really important, and we want to be building programs that are going to work for, if we can build programs that are going to work for the folks that are struggling the most, that's going to help everyone. So I think that's exactly right. I think, that approach of maybe like, really building some profiles of looking at, okay, here are folks that are in that haven't even started rebuilding phase. And maybe there are a few different, right? It's probably not one story. Some of them may be the youngest folks, some of them may be the oldest folks. Some of them, may have just really not had a lot of social support, right? And connections to the community. And so I think just looking at sort of, looking at also connecting that to what programs do people know about, I would say, yeah, one of the, again, interesting things about this survey, I had people, when I sent out the invitation to reply, I had one person write back in just kind of a one-word response: I can't reply right now, I'm in too much pain. And so luckily I had, Jerry Curry on my, not speed dial, but on the right. And so just connected and said, Jerry, has this person, I asked them, have you connected with the Marshall Rock? And they hadn't yet. And so, trying to make that connection. But I think that's just that indicator that, again, kind of feel like 2 years in, people must be, there's been so much work to try and reach folks. But that doesn't mean that everybody has been, has gotten what they needed. And so, so yeah, I think that work of continuing to understand who those folks are, and what they might need is important. Anything else? Great, well, we will send around the slides and recording and follow up with you as we get started with our next phases as well. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, we're sitting on all of this information and as I said at the beginning, we can think of lots of questions that we have about all of this and what we're hoping to learn. But we really want to prioritize, the things that that can help with the decisions that, that all of you continue to make and be a part of. So we are very eager to collaborate and share information and all of that. So appreciate you being here today, and we will be in touch. This is not the last you'll hear from us.
Katie, quickly to that end, anything we should consider before sharing out some of this data to other folks that we're in contact with and who work in this space?
I think I'm pretty happy with this. I think folks can go ahead and share. Yeah.
Great.
And
Thank you.
the website, so Hannah, I think at the beginning shared the technical report version of this as well. So yeah, share away.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.